This terrifying story happened to a young, unemployed man named Peter. He was heavily addicted to smoking and spent all day lying around in his room, refusing to find a new job. That day, his roommate John brought his girlfriend over to hang out. As soon as they stepped inside, they were hit with a strong smell of cigarette smoke. John scolded Peter, asking why he kept smoking so freely in their shared living space. John told Peter to be more considerate and to smoke in his own room. However, Peter argued that the living room was a place for relaxation. He smoked while watching movies, claiming it was his personal right. John's girlfriend was visibly uncomfortable. She urged John to hurry into his room, saying she couldn't stand staying there any longer. After the two of them went into the room, Peter became annoyed. John had a good job and a beautiful girlfriend. No wonder he looked down on him. Inside John's room, the couple was getting intimate. Suddenly, cigarette smoke wafted in through the door crack. His girlfriend, sensitive to the smell, immediately noticed and told John. It turned out that Peter was pressing his ear against the door, eavesdropping. They were disgusted by how perverted he was. John, furious, stormed out and cursed at Peter, yelling that he couldn't even have privacy in his own room. After chasing Peter away, John slammed the door shut, deciding he would move out soon. There was no way he could keep living with Peter. Just then, John's girlfriend noticed a foul odor. On the wall near the door, there was a disgusting, stained patch. Unable to stand the filth, she decided to leave. She said she couldn't stay in such a dirty place any longer. It reeked of cigarettes and crime was everywhere. It was unbearable for someone as clean as her. No matter how much John tried to stop her, his girlfriend angrily walked out. As the door closed, John was left frustrated and upset. It was all Peter's fault. Witnessing everything, Peter sneered at John mockingly. "What's wrong? That was fast. Just 5 minutes? You're too weak." John shoved Peter aside, saying he couldn't take it anymore. He was going to move out. With that, John slammed the door shut. But then he noticed a stain on the wall, the thing that had disgusted his girlfriend. Grabbing a box tar, John scrubbed at the yellowish stain. He had no idea when it appeared, but it looked like a cigarette burn. John assumed Peter must have caused it. A filthy guy like him was impossible to live with. However, just as he was about to scrape it off, John was shocked. From the stain, a small wriggling creature emerged, stuck to the wall like a fungus. John had never seen anything so bizarre. It was no longer just a stain. It was a grotesque mushroom growing out of the wall. The fungus dropped to the floor, leaving John stunned. Instinctively, John stomped on it in disgust. But to his horror, a revolting stench filled the air, forcing him to cover his nose. Then John realized something. The creature seemed to be attracted to cigarette smoke. This gave him an idea for revenge. He walked into the living room where Peter usually sat. There were cigarette butts everywhere, and the ashtray was surrounded by the same stains he had seen in his room. John picked up a still burning cigarette to test his theory. He held the smoke near one of the stains, suspecting that another creature was inside. Immediately, the smoke was sucked into the stain. John's guess was right. The creatures were addicted to cigarette smoke. Watching the cigarette burn, John came up with a way to teach Peter a lesson. He went out, bought a pack of cigarettes, and then knocked on Peter's door. Peter, about to go to sleep, was annoyed at being disturbed. John entered with a friendly smile, offering Peter the pack as an apology for their earlier argument. Peter, seeing John being considerate for once, happily accepted it. He immediately lit one up and took a deep drag. Watching this made John's skin crawl. It was disgusting. Suddenly, Peter began coughing violently. He realized something was wrong. It felt like something was crawling in his throat. Knowing he had been pranked, Peter lunged at John, but John kicked him hard, sending him sprawling to the floor. To John's horror, something started emerging from Peter's mouth. It looked exactly like the parasite mushroom John had stomped on earlier. John admitted that he had put one of the creatures inside the cigarette. This was the punishment Peter deserved. John continued to berate Peter for his filthiness and for invading others' privacy. But then, Peter let out a strange, eerie laugh. He smirked and called John naive. The parasites, they were his creation. With that, Peter removed his shirt. His body was covered in stains, just like the ones on the walls. John was horrified. Could it be that Peter's entire body was home to these monstrous parasites? It was terrifying. Peter's skin was littered with stains, the tests of the grotesque parasites. Peter looked at John and whispered, "Anyone who knows my secret never has a happy ending." This terrifying story begins at a grand art museum in the city, a place where valuable paintings are displayed. In the exhibition room of the most renowned artist of the time, visitors were gathered admiring his masterpieces. At the center of the room, a young man deeply engrossed kept praising the artist's astonishingly lifelike paintings. However, in the corner of the room, a peculiar man spoke in a low voice, claiming that all the paintings there were fakes. The young man and the crowd turned toward the strange man, eyeing him suspiciously, assuming he was just talking nonsense. Yet with unwavering confidence, the man reassured that all of the famous artist's paintings in this room were counterfeits. The young man was deeply skeptical. He questioned whether the man had any expertise in authentication to make such a bold claim. With an air of certainty, the man stated that original paintings by the great artist always had a strong metallic scent. He added that original works did not require protective materials like glass frames, yet could endure for decades without fading. Someone approached the painting and sniffed it. Indeed, the painting completely lacked the characteristics the man had described. The young man was fully convinced. He felt disappointed, thinking he had hoped to find a master's today, but it now seemed like a waste of time. However, a daring thought suddenly flashed through his mind. He eagerly walked up to the man in the hat, assuming he must be a fan of the artist since he had studied the painting so thoroughly. Without any hesitation, the man admitted that he was fascinated by the paintings, so he had carefully studied the artist's techniques. Suddenly, a hint of disappointment crossed his face. With a sigh, he revealed that he had come to the exhibition hoping to find more paintings to add to his collection. The young man was visibly excited and asked if the man had any additional information about the paintings, as he was interested in purchasing a few. The man handed over a business card, introducing himself as a collector specializing in works by the famous artists. If the young man needed anything, he could reach out. The young man eagerly took the card and said he had time today. He wanted to see some original paintings and hoped to have the opportunity to admire the man's collection. The man agreed, much to the young man's delight. At least his trip today wouldn't be entirely in vain. By the afternoon, he followed the address on the business card and arrived at a lavish mansion. Inside a grand room, the walls were covered with paintings. The man explained that he had studied the artist's techniques and replicated them himself. He pointed to one painting and proudly claimed that the artist himself had personally guided him in recreating it. The young man couldn't hide his admiration. The replica was astonishingly realistic. down to the finest detail. He marveled at the painting, remarking that it was indistinguishable from the original. As he spoke, he reached out to touch it. However, before he could lay a finger on it, the man behind him suddenly shouted, forbidding him from touching it. Startled, the young man turned around. Seeing the man's irritated expression, he stammered, asking why it was such a big deal. Realizing he had overreacted, the man quickly tried to dismiss any suspicion by saying it was nothing serious. Lowering his head, he added that since these were just puppets, they held no real value. He then pointed to a room in the back, explaining that the original paintings were stored in there. The young man was overjoyed and asked if he could take a look inside. The man didn't refuse and told him to wait while he went to get the key. He then turned and left. The moment he disappeared, the young man revealed his true intentions. In reality, he was a professional art thief. He had come here today to make a lucrative score. He reached into his pocket and took out a tool he had prepared. It was a master key of his own design, capable of unlocking any lock. In the blink of an eye, he had unlocked the room. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. He couldn't believe his eyes. There were so many paintings. He quickly rushed forward. This was an opportunity beyond his wildest dreams. Gazing at the walls lined with paintings, each and every one an authentic original, he was ecstatic. This was a jackpot. As he was taking the paintings down, he suddenly heard a faint, desperate whisper. Someone was calling for help. He swiftly turned around and softly asked who was speaking. However, he saw no one. Yet the raspy whisper continued. Listening closely, he realized the sound was coming from an iron door in the corner of the room. The door wasn't locked, so he opened it and stepped inside. The room appeared to be nothing more than a simple art studio. However, in the center of the room stood a large easel. It seemed to hold an unfinished painting. Curious, he stepped closer to see what was being painted. Within the painting was a human figure in an extremely unnatural pose. The whispering sound emanated from the painting. He leaned in to get a better look, assuming it was a sculpture. Suddenly, the figure in the painting moved, letting out a weak, raspy plea for help. At that moment, he screamed in horror. The person in the painting was none other than the renowned artist himself. Just then, the door to the room burst open, and the man outside shouted that he had caught an intruder. Flashback to earlier, when he and the young man had been chatting and he had left to fetch the key. As he turned to leave, both of them harbored their own hidden intentions. The man smirked sinisterly. Another victim had walked right in. His collection was about to gain another painting. He unlocked the door and stepped into the room. As he walked, he relished the thought it had been a long time since he last created a new painting. Today was indeed a lucky day. Looking at the scattered materials in the room, he wondered what medium he should use for the young man's painting. Reaching for his keying, he smugly thought that before turning him into a painting, he would let him choose the medium himself. Suddenly, a terrified scream jolted him. It seemed the young man had discovered something. He immediately dashed to the room. Throwing open the iron door, he saw the young man standing there. His secret was out. The painting of the artist had fallen to the ground. Rotten flesh splattered everywhere. The man clutched his head in rage, furious that the masterpiece he had spent so much effort creating was being destroyed. Now that he understood the horrific truth behind these paintings, the young man was utterly horrified. They had been made using real people. The man bent down and picked up the painting. He declared that the key to his masterpieces was transferring living beings onto the canvas. He had spent years researching and even begged artists to teach him the technique. And in the end, to honor the artist, he had decided to turn him into the most important masterpiece of his life. He had invested immense time and effort in capturing the artist on canvas, and now someone had dared to ruin it. He then turned back and said that initially he had planned to turn the young man into a painting, but now he simply wanted him dead. As soon as he finished speaking, he lunged forward, grabbing the young man's throat. Caught off guard, the young man couldn't react in time. Within moments, he struggled to breathe. The man sneered, a cruel grin spreading across his face. The young man flailed his arms, desperately searching for something to fight back. His hand finally grasped onto something. Instinctively, he grabbed it and lifted it. Using all his strength, he swung it forcefully at the deranged man. It turned out to be a painting. The man was instantly sucked into it. Blood gushed out as his body was slowly pulled into the painting, creating a horrifying scene. The young man smirked in triumph of what he was like to become a painting. Eating someone like him wasn't easy. Now the man would finally experience what it was like to become a painting. Once the man was completely absorbed into the canvas, the young man stepped closer and flipped it over. Inside the painting were both the renowned artist and the twisted imitator. It was truly a masterpiece. He pondered that this painting could undoubtedly be sold for a fortune. However, just before the man was fully transformed, a sinister smile slowly spread across his lips. The young man stood there grinning in satisfaction. This was the perfect fate for two twisted individuals who used people to create art. From within the painting, black tendrils slithered out, tapping around him and dragging him inside. He could only let out a final scream before the room fell silent once more, as if nothing had ever happened.